Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. This is Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host. My name's Larry Erickson, and for the next nearly half an hour, I'm going to be rattling on about a couple of things that I think are important and that you should pay attention to. If you have any reactions to the show, feel free to email me. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING, that's at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be here somewhere. You can get the email from there if you didn't catch it, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. I do ask that if you send me email that you always be sure to include something in the subject line to make it clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer, because I just hate answering email, and so it takes me forever to do it. But I do it, and you will get an answer. Any event, with that out of the way, let's get started, and we're going to start, as I always like to whenever I can, with some good news. Now, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago what I call the pretty good news, that the Shell Oil Company was pulling out of drilling in the Arctic Ocean for the foreseeable future. The description, pretty good news, driven by the fact that it was for the foreseeable future, not permanently. Well, now we can add a little emphasis to that. Faced with dwindling industry interest in it as exemplified by Shell Oils, and faced with continued complaints from environmentalists about it, the Obama administration has now canceled two planned sales of oil drilling leases in the Arctic Ocean. One of them was planned for 2016, the other for 2017. What's more, the Interior Department has rejected the request of two oil companies, Shell and Statoil, to have more time to consider drilling under their current leases, which start to expire in 2017. And what this means is that Shell's foreseeable future may be stretching out further into the future than the company ever imagined. The Drill Baby Drill Caucus was, of course, quick to blame environmental regulations and to denounce the cancellation of the sales. Representative Rod Bishop, who frighteningly enough chairs the House Committee on Natural Resources, said that Obama, I'm quoting him, has once again played directly into Russia's hands by blocking drilling in the environmentally sensitive waters of the Arctic. This isn't the end of the issue, of course, not with Arctic Ocean drilling lease sales still planned for 2020 and 2022. But the cancellation of lease sales over the next 2 years is still quite welcome. And with any luck and a lot of work on our parts, drilling in the Arctic, or anywhere else for that matter, may make even less sense in 2020 than it does now. And wouldn't that be good news? Some other good news, and this actually is on an unexpected front. Guns. On October 19th, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that key sections of gun control laws passed by the states of New York and Connecticut in the wake of the Newtown massacre do not violate the Constitution. The laws in question broaden the definition of what constitutes a prohibited weapon to include any semi-automatic firearm containing at least one of several military-style features, including grenade launchers and flash suppressors. That definition actually would include the AR-15, the popular model that Adam Lanza used to mow down school children in Newtown. The two states also banned large-capacity magazines of the sort that, as the court noted in its ruling, enabled Lanza to fire 154 rounds in less than 5 minutes. Now, the gun fondlers' arguments against the laws, of course, claimed God, in the form of the Holy Second Amendment, was on their side, as well as claiming the laws were unconstitutionally vague, which means that the laws, you couldn't tell from the law what sort of gun was banned and what wasn't, so what was legal and what wasn't. Which is actually kind of funny, considering that the Connecticut law specifically banned 183 types of assault weapons by make and model. And it's hard to get less vague than that. What's important, actually, here is that the court did not fall for the Second Amendment arguments. Now, they acknowledge that the restrictions here are a real, that is, an actual existing burden on the Second Amendment. They also found the degree of burden insufficient to make a constitutional claim because the laws don't, quoting the court, effectively disarm individuals or substantially affect their ability to defend themselves. Now, the ruling did strike down one part of the New York law that outlawed so-called feeding devices holding more than 7 rounds, and a Connecticut ban on one particular type of non-semi-automatic pump-action shotgun. And the narrow reach of those parts of the decision, the narrow reach of what was shot down, if you will, just point out the broad reach of the overall decision. Now, the gun fondlers are, of course, already preparing to appeal to the Supreme Court, but there is at least hope that things there will not go as well as they may expect. I mean, they'll doubtless be relying on those 2 notorious Supreme Court decisions, and controversial and, I think, wholly wrong decisions, in District of Columbia v. Heller and McDonald v. Chicago. These rulings, for the first time in U.S. history, and despite precedent, though precedent is something the right wing claims to adore so much, but despite precedent, these cases found for the first time an individual as opposed to a collective right of guns for self-defense. But those decisions, in fact, were not as good for them as the gun nuts think, nor as bad for them as the gun control advocates sometimes think, because those rulings specifically allowed, in so many words, for reasonable restrictions on guns. But that argument is actually still in the future. In the here and now, we can celebrate a court victory for common sense, which is always good news. In fact, as a sort of a footnote to that, legal experts quoted by Reuters said that they expect the decision to have just symbolic rather than practical effect, because in the words of one of them, all this says that if you pass such a law, it will be constitutional. The point being, of course, that you have to get the laws passed in the first place. Now, that's not entirely accurate because the decision did have a practical effect. New York and Connecticut still have their gun control laws. But the intended point is valid. It doesn't matter how constitutional gun control measures are if you can't get them passed. Which is frustrating because the public has consistently favored stronger gun laws. Gallup polls over the last 16 years, that is the years 2000 to 2015 inclusive, when people are given the choice of 3 options, make gun laws stronger, make them weaker, or leave them the same, support for weaker laws never exceeded 13% in any of those polls. And except for 3 years when the public was evenly divided on make them stronger or leave them the same, those supporting stronger laws have always come out clearly on top. And in fact, in 11 of those 16 years, those supporting stronger laws were clearly a majority of those polled. And still, nothing happens. And in that fact lies what is the outrage of the week. Nothing happens. The thing is, gun ownership, we keep forgetting this. Gun ownership is a minority position. Not only do majorities favor stronger controls, including a lot of gun owners, but owning guns is a minority position. Only a minority of U.S. households even have a gun. Now, different surveys have different results as to how many. Some say as few as 34%, others say as high as 43%, but the point is they're all consistent in one way. A minority of American households have guns. We are the majority. On gun ownership, on gun control, we are the majority. And still nothing happens. The facts of guns in this country, the fact of gun violence in this country simply cannot rationally be denied. which means the gun nuts will deny them, but they can't rationally be denied. They are a hard, cold reality. There are far, far more gun homicides in the United States per 100,000 population than in any other industrialized nation on earth. The rate of murder by gun in the United States, it's double, it's triple, it's quadruple, it's 5 times, it's 10 times, it's even 20 times the rate in other countries. And that is true and remains true despite a 39% drop in gun homicides in the U.S. since the early 1990s. And more guns means more homicides. Overall, the rate of gun ownership in each of the United States, the higher the rate of gun ownership, the higher the rate of gun homicide. And what's more, the relationship between rate of gun ownership and rate of gun suicide is even stronger than the connection between guns and homicide. And at the same time, it also works in reverse. The states with the strictest gun control laws have the lowest rate of gun-related deaths. And still nothing happens. It's been argued that mass shootings are only a very small part of the overall mayhem caused by guns, which is actually true, and that they are exceedingly rare, which is false if you use a more reasonable definition of mass shooting rather than one in which 4 people are killed. It's one in which 4 people at least are shot, even if they're not killed. By that definition, 4 or more shot in a single incident, there is nearly 1 mass shooting a day in the United States. And in 2015, it has averaged more than 1 a day. And still nothing happens. Babies are killing people and other babies in this country. Recently, a reporter for the Washington Post said he spent a few hours sifting through news reports and found 43 cases in the U.S. this year, that's more than 1 a week, of a toddler, a child less than 4 years old, finding a gun and shooting someone. In 31 of those cases, the toddler shot themselves. In those 43 cases, 15 people were killed by this, and in 13 of those 15, it was the toddler killing themselves. As the writer points out, his numbers are surely an undercount. There were probably cases of toddlers shooting themselves or somebody else, but the injuries are only so minor it never drew any attention. And likely a lot more cases where the gun was fired, but the bullet didn't hit anybody. And the things you remember right now, these are toddlers we're talking about. These are children no more than 3 years old. What about older children? We actually don't know. We don't know how often children in this country shoot other children, whether accidentally or deliberately. But one thing you can be sure of is that in every one of those cases, every one of those guns was owned by somebody who would call themselves a responsible gun owner whose God-given right to amass firepower must not be abridged. And still nothing happens. And part of the reason nothing happens? In 1996, at the behest of the nutsoid rabbit brains of America, the NRA, and let's not forget, by the way, despite what it claims, the NRA does not represent gun owners. It represents gun manufacturers. That's who its real clients are. Gun manufacturers who, of course, want to sell as many guns and as much gun paraphernalia as they can to make as much money as they can, and not caring how many people die as the result of their pursuit of profit. But at the behest of the nutsoids, Congress stripped money from research on firearm injury from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and directed it somewhere else, and included language in that directing that no CDC injury research funding could go to any research that might be used in whole or in part to promote gun control. Now, since it's hard to imagine any research on gun violence that could not be made to look like an argument for gun control, because that's where all the facts point, this amounted to a ban on federally funded research on gun violence. And this year, as it has year after year, Congress again refused to lift that ban. Which means that CDC funding for gun research, gun violence research, has pretty much dried up, and that gap has not been filled by private sources, and researchers have been shying away from the field, not least because those who do dare to try to do research on gun violence report receiving angry emails and death threats from the gun nuts. We have here a deliberate creation of a state of ignorance, which the gun fanatics fill with their lies, their paranoia, and their Wild West gunslinger fantasies. And nothing happens. Except, wait, something does happen. We continue to die by gun by the tens of thousands every year. It is an outrage. We're going to take a break now. We're back. As a PS to all that about guns, how about a quick example of an occasional feature around here, which we call You Gotta Just Laugh. The state of Texas has passed a campus carry law, which will allow anyone, including students, with a concealed carry permit to bring their guns onto college campuses and into campus buildings. The law is slated to go into effect next August. Meanwhile, Texas A&M says this in their regulations for dormitories. I'm quoting, "Propelling devices such as rockets, catapults, slingshots, nerf-type guns, or any homemade device for the purpose of launching an object are prohibited." So come next fall, students attending Texas A&M University can have a concealed handgun on them, and that is just fine. But if they dare to show up with a Nerf gun, they're in trouble. You just gotta laugh. Speaking of things to laugh at, it's time for one of our regular features, which we call the Clown Award. It's given, as always, for an act of meritorious stupidity. And the winner of the Big Red Nose this week is Alaska Governor Bill Walker. In a recent interview with the BBC, Walker said the state of Alaska is facing a significant fiscal challenge due to climate change. There are, he said, some 12 villages at risk of being washed away due to rising sea levels and coastal erosions driven by global warming. Dealing with that, which could involve having to move these villages inland, would be very expensive, he said, something on the order of $100 million. All right, so what is the answer offered by governor of the state with neither income taxes nor sales taxes? It is, he said, an absolute urgency for the feds to allow drilling for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge so that Alaska can increase its income from the levies it places on that production. Okay, let's sum up. Global climate change, driven largely by burning of fossil fuels, such as oil, threatens 12 Alaskan villages with destruction. And the only solution the governor of Alaska can come up with is to do more of the very thing that caused the problem in the first place. Alaska Governor Bill Walker, really and truly thinking like a clown. All right, now another one of our occasional segments. It's called Everything You Need to Know, where this is where you can learn a great deal about something in a very short time. In this case, it's everything you need to know about the reality of money in politics, although truthfully, this time we need a little background, a little backstory in order to make it make sense. So, timeline here. August 10th, smirking little prig Martin Shkreli acquires the rights to Daraprim, used to treat toxoplasmosis. September 17th, Shkreli has jacked the price of Daraprim up by 5,500%. September 21st, Senator Bernie Sanders, in his role as ranking member of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, writes to Shkreli saying the committee is investigating drug prices and asking for information. September 28th, smirking little pig Martin Shkreli makes the maximum legal individual donation, $2,700, to the Sanders presidential campaign. October 15th, the Sanders campaign says it will not keep the money, but will instead donate $2,700 to the Whitman Walker Health Clinic in Washington, D.C., which specializes in HIV/AIDS treatment and care for the LGBT community in the city. October 15th, smirking little prig Martin Shkreli admits he mainly gave the money to Sanders as a means of getting a private meeting with him. So here we are with everything you need to know. Smirking little prig Martin Shkreli openly acknowledges that he expected his donation would buy him access to a senator. And this has become so routine, so everyday, that he did not even feel the need to use any obfuscating language. And that is everything you need to know. All right. Something else here. Last week I expressed my anger over the demonization of the poor as drug abusers. Demonization leading to the assumption that they all have to be drug tested. They have to prove they're drug free. They have to prove that they are pure in order to qualify for public assistance. I'm going to go on about that a little more this week because of some things that have come up, and because this demonization of the poor has continued. And I know I'm saying stuff I said last week, okay? I'm going to go back over some of the same ground. Bear with me. The demonization of the poor has continued despite the fact that experience has repeatedly shown that poor people are less likely to be using drugs than the general population, which, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense because poor people can't afford all those drugs. Despite that history, despite the evidence that the poor are not drug abusers, 13 states have passed legislation to drug test applicants for or recipients of public aid. And 2 of those states, Arkansas and Wisconsin, did so this year. In addition, 18 states have bills pending to do the same. Because of various court rulings that said that blanket drug testing is a violation of Fourth Amendment privacy rights, those bills tried various ways to work around that by using questionnaires, the person's history, or the catch-all term suspicion-based screening, whatever that means. Just how blatant is this demonization of the poor? When Florida pursued its unsuccessful attempt before the courts to justify drug testing all applicants for public assistance, it actually argued in one of its briefs that there is a, quoting, concrete danger that poor people are drug abusers. That there is, in other words, you could just assume that poor people are drug users. This is despite the fact that Florida's own program, before it was stopped by the courts, had already shown a rate of drug abuse among applicants for assistance of just 2.6% in a state where it's estimated that 8% of the general population are users. And it's not just so-called red states either. One of the bluest of the blue, Massachusetts, is now considering a bill that would require a drug test for anyone applying for aid if they've had a drug conviction anytime in the last 20 years. That same would apply to anyone who would receive any aid as a result of that same application. Fail the test and you're barred from public assistance for a year unless you complete a drug rehab program at your own expense, which of course you may not be able to do unless there is a free state-approved one available, because if you could afford the cost of a drug rehab program, you probably would not be applying for public assistance in the first place. Now, why do we bring this up again? Okay. Well, this sort of demonization has primarily been directed at recipients of TANF, that's Temporary Aid to Needy Families, or similar programs which together made up what we used to call welfare before that word became poisoned by the right wing in their hatred for the poor, and also by the liberals in their condescension toward the poor and their cowardice in the face of right-wing attacks. But that scope is not enough for some people. So Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, wants to go beyond TANF to have random drug tests for people living in or applying to live in public housing. Housing which he repeatedly referred to as drug-infested. We should be, he said, looking at how do you have a drug-free area. Which in a way sums up the whole bigotry of it all. I mean, you know full well you could walk through virtually any neighborhood, anywhere in this country, walk down that street and know that there is drug use going on somewhere in the area around you. That every community, you could pretty much assume, is, by Manchin's terms, drug infested. But we don't demand all those people prove that they're drug free. Only the poor. We don't demand that those applying for subsidized student loans, like Stafford grants, prove that they are drug-free before they get the aid. Only the poor. We don't demand a middle-class family taking advantage of the Earned Income Tax Credit get tested first. Only the poor. We don't demand that the rich pee in a cup before they can take their mortgage tax deductions on their McMansions. Only the poor. We don't demand that farmers looking for price supports prove their purity before they get aid. Only the poor. When corporations, through their lobbyists, get special exemptions written into the tax code for their own benefit, we don't demand that those corporate executives prove that they're clean so that we can be sure that the benefit that they're getting doesn't go to supply somebody's drug habit. Only the poor. No public financial benefit of any kind, no grant, no tax deduction, no low-interest loan, no subsidy, none of it comes with the demand to pee in a cup unless the recipient is poor. It's only the poor who we expect to suffer the humiliation, the degradation, the soul-killing suspicion that they are somehow morally inferior and must prove their purity before we will deign to condescend to offer them a shiny penny. And we expect that because that's what we really think. That's what we really think as a society. We think that the poor are inferior. We think they are lazy, drug-addled loafers who need the strict but, of course, truly loving direction and guidance of their betters, meaning us. This is bigotry. This is class bigotry, or as I call it, classism. And our society stinks of it. That's it for this week. We're done. We're going to get out of here. Hopefully, I can be a little more cheerful next week. We'll see how it goes. In the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can. And as always, peace.